The road south from Kurotani was not a road by any measure a traveler from the lowland cities would have recognized. It was a suggestion pressed into the earth by decades of reluctant feet, merchants hauling lacquer and dried fish, pilgrims with their white coats gone gray from mountain mud, the occasional ronin passing through without looking left or right, carrying nothing anyone needed to ask about. By late winter, the suggestion became an argument. The snow did not fall here so much as accumulate, silently, patiently, until the ruts left by cartwheels from autumn were buried under half a man's height of white silence. And the road existed only as a memory held by those who had walked it before. Cale was descending the northern ridge when he saw the woman sitting beside a frozen drainage ditch, not resting but stopped. In the way a person stops when continuation has temporarily ceased to be a decision they are making. She wore a heavy outer coat of indigo-dyed cotton, worn thin at the elbows, patched at one shoulder with cloth that did not match. A pack beside her. Too large for her frame, the kind of pack a person carries when they have lost the luxury of leaving things behind. She was not crying. She was not looking for help. She was simply sitting in the snow. And the quality of her stillness was not the stillness of rest, but the stillness of someone who has decided to wait and see what the next few minutes would ask of her before deciding whether to continue. Cale stopped on the ridge above her and assessed. She was perhaps 30, perhaps older, cold weather and hard living compressed age the way leather compresses under use. Her hands were visible where her gloves had fallen into her lap. And they told him things her stillness did not. The knuckles were calloused in the specific way of someone who worked with precision rather than force. Her pack had several small pouches attached at the outer seams. The organization of someone who needed to find things quickly and in the dark. She had not looked up at him. This was not because she had not noticed him. He had seen the slight change in her breathing from 40 paces, the adjustment of someone who has catalogued a threat and filed it under manageable. He came down the ridge and stopped at what he judged was a respectful distance. He looked at the road south. He looked at the sky, which had the flat gray quality of a sky preparing to do something definitive about the remaining daylight. He looked at the subtle asymmetry of her posture, weight favoring her left side. The right managing something it preferred not to discuss. He did not ask if she was all right. The question would have been an insult. He said, "There's a way station 2 hours south. The roof is intact." She looked up at him then for the first time. Her face was composed in the way that faces compose themselves when composure has become structural rather than performed. Her eyes moved across him with the efficiency of someone accustomed to quick assessment, the sword at his hip. The condition of his clothing, the angle of his approach. Whatever she found, she appeared neither relieved nor alarmed. She looked at the road south, then back at him and made a gesture with her right hand, a small, economical motion that stood in for yes or continue without requiring any of those words to exist. He nodded once and started south. After a moment he heard her rise, heard the creak of the pack settling onto her shoulders, heard her footsteps fall into place beside him, not too close, the correct distance for strangers sharing a road. What he did not understand yet, what the gray afternoon had not yet seen fit to show him, was that she had not spoken a single word in 4 days, and that this silence was not a wound but a wall she had built herself, stone by stone, for reasons that would take longer than a 2-hour walk to understand. The way station was where he had said it would be. The roof was intact enough, which in mountain winter was all the word had ever meant. A low building of weathered wood built into the hillside, 2 rooms through a sliding door that gave with one firm pull. The front room had a raised wooden platform, a small clay brazier, and a pile of dry wood stacked against the far wall by someone who had passed through earlier in the season. The gift that mountain travelers sometimes left each other, the gift of thinking forward to the next stranger. Kale checked the wood and felt the relief of a man for whom dry wood carries genuine consequence. He built a fire. She set her pack against the wall and stood briefly assessing the room, the exits, the ceiling for water damage, the condition of the floor. Then she opened her pack's outer pouches and began organizing, placing things where they could be found. A cloth bundle, a small ceramic container sealed with wax, a folded piece of oilcloth. She moved with the care of someone working from long habit, not performing order but requiring it. He made rice with dried fish and miso from his own pack. When it was ready, he placed a portion in his second bowl. He carried a second bowl the way some men carry a second weapon, without particular explanation, and set it on the platform near her without comment. She looked at it. She looked at him. She ate. They sat in the firelight and ate in silence. The silence was not comfortable and not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have not yet decided what kind of silence they are sitting in. The next morning she was awake before him. She had rebuilt the fire from the night's coals and had a small pot of her own on the brazier, steaming something that smelled of pine resin and something sharper underneath. She was bent over her right arm, sleeve pushed back, working on the inner forearm with the focused attention of a person performing a task that requires exact pressure. He lay still for a moment, watching through half-closed eyes. The arm told him what he had only guessed from her posture. There was bruising, old bruising, yellowish at the edges, which put it at 5 or 6 days, with something darker at the center suggesting repeated impact, not a fall. Falls produce different patterns, distributed and irregular. This was concentrated, deliberate. She had been struck, repeatedly in the same place, by someone who understood where pressure caused lasting damage. And she had been traveling alone through mountain winter for 4 days since, and she had not frozen, and she had not stopped. She had sat down in the snow only for the moment she needed to decide whether continuation was still worth it. Which it apparently had been, because here she was, rebuilding a stranger's fire and treating her own injuries with the methodical competence of a woman who had been managing her own survival long enough that it no longer required deliberation. He sat up. She did not startle. She finished what she was doing, applying something from the ceramic container to her skin with a small cloth, folding the sleeve back down. Before acknowledging him with the slight inclination of her head that he was coming to understand as her version of morning greeting, he rebuilt the fire to full heat. He made tea. He put a cup near her. She drank it without acknowledging the gesture directly, which was, he was learning, how she acknowledged most things, not ignoring them but absorbing them, filing them in that interior account she appeared to be keeping with precision. Outside. The morning was clear for the first time in days. The sky above the cedars was a blue so intense it looked ceramic. Wind moved through the tops of the trees and sent cascades of snow down through the lower branches in glittering falls. And the sound this made, the soft percussion of snow against snow, the creak of weighted cedar boughs, the tiny settling sounds of a forest redistributing its load, was the only sound in the world for several minutes. He watched her listen to it. She had turned toward the door, which he had slid open 6 inches for the light, and her face had the quality of someone receiving information rather than experiencing sensation. She was listening to the trees the way a person listens to a voice speaking in a language they mostly understand, attending carefully to specific words rather than general meaning. He said, 2 days to the next real town. 1 more way station between here and there. The road is passable in this weather. She looked at him and made the yes gesture. Then she made a second, smaller motion, compressed, directed not at the road but at her arm. Something between acknowledgement and dismissal. It meant something like I know, or it's manageable, or leave this alone. He let it alone. They walked the second day in the kind of cold that had stopped trying to feel threatening and arrived at something more like inevitability. Steady, pressing. Coming from the ground underfoot, and from the air drawn into the lungs, and from the light itself, which gave warmth in appearance only. He walked with the unhurried pace he had developed over years of mountain travel. The pace that eats distance without fighting it, and she matched it without effort. This was not nothing. Her pack was genuine weight, her right arm was limiting load distribution, and she was maintaining a pace that most experienced mountain travelers would have found adequate. He had adjusted her carrying without comment the first afternoon, taking the outermost bundle from her pack's external frame when she paused to redistribute weight, adding it to his own load without making it a transaction, simply removing an inefficiency the way a carpenter removes a nail working against the grain. She had watched him do this. She had not stopped him. She had not thanked him. She had adjusted the lighter pack and continued walking. By midday, they reached a section of road where an old avalanche had covered the track with broken cedar and compacted snow. He went first, testing, and she followed with the precise footfall of someone who understood that the path laid by someone heavier was not automatically correct for someone lighter. She chose her own line through the debris, parallel to his but not identical, adapting to her own weight distribution with a practical intelligence that required nothing from him. She stopped at the midpoint of the debris field and stood very still. And when he turned, he saw she was reading a depression in the snow 10 paces east, the approximate dimensions of a large animal's form, recently vacated, the edges still sharp, surrounded by tracks heading south into the cedars and not returning. She pointed to the south tree line with her chin, a question. "Bear," he said, 4 or 5 days ago, moving down, which means it hasn't settled yet, it's not here now." She looked at the impression another moment, then continued through the debris with the same measured footfall as before. The second way station was in worse repair. The rear room's roof had given way under accumulated snow, leaving a hole open to the sky and a pile of debris below. The front room was intact. The brazier was functional. There was no wood. He went to find wood. This took longer than it should, the surrounding cedars' old growth with their fallen branches buried deep. And he searched the tree line for recent timber close enough to retrieve. He came back 20 minutes later to find she had swept the front room with a cedar branch and arranged their sleeping materials on the platform with a practical organization that used the interior walls as wind blocks without appearing considered. He built the fire. She made tea from dried bark or herbs, a flavor with the astringent warmth of things grown at altitude. She placed a cup near him. He drank it. The night came down on the mountains in definitive stages, the blue going from the sky in strips until only a pale gold remained above the western ridge. And then that too went, and the stars came out with the ferocity of stars seen at altitude, hard and white and close, offering light without warmth in the way that honest people sometimes offer truth. She had taken out a small folded piece of paper from the inner pocket of her coat and was looking at it in the firelight with an expression he had not seen on her before. All her expressions until now had been organized around function, assessment, acknowledgement, the neutral focus of a person doing a task. This was different. This was the expression of someone looking at something that predated the wall, that belonged to a version of herself she was currently unable to visit. He looked away. Some things did not require a witness. What the paper contained, what face or name or piece of a life before the bruising and the frozen road it held. This was not something he was entitled to, and he did not make himself entitled to it by looking, but the sight of her face in that specific quality of softness, there and then gone, had lodged in him in the way that small things lodge in a man who has made himself empty enough to hold them. On the third day her fever broke. He had suspected it the second evening when she twice adjusted her collar in the way people adjust clothing when their body is producing more heat than the environment requires. Through the night he had tended the fire at intervals, and by the fourth time he woke, she was in the stillness of genuine deep sleep, rather than the shallow, managed stillness of someone fighting their own body's complaints. By morning, the brightness of fever heat had gone from her eyes and left them clear and very tired. She woke to find tea already made, rice with the last of his dried fish, and the fire banked to last the morning. She sat up slowly, taking inventory, pressing her fingers to her own wrist, breathing in twice with deliberate depth. She accepted the results of this assessment with the equanimity of a woman who regards her own body as equipment that sometimes requires maintenance and cannot always be consulted about scheduling. She ate. She drank the tea. She looked at him across the brazier with an expression that was not gratitude exactly, something more structural than gratitude. The acknowledgement that an account has been carefully kept, and she is aware of the balance. Outside, the road south descended toward the first valley in 3 days, visible from the doorway as a switchback track dropping through cedar forest toward a distant V of open gray sky that meant open country, and somewhere below the frost line, the first village large enough to have a physician. The snow on the track was wind-packed, hard, good traveling, he said. Town by tonight if we make the descent by midday. She made the yes gesture, and then she made a second gesture, slower, deliberate, directed not at the road but at him. Her right hand, palm slightly open, moved once in his direction, not reaching, not requesting, something between acknowledgement and offering, the kind of gesture that exists in spaces where language has reached its limit. He did not know what it meant exactly. He knew what it meant enough. He turned south and started down the track toward the valley. The town was called Tanimoto, a valley-based name, given by people who arrived somewhere and called it what it was, without apology or decoration. Larger than a village, smaller than anything on a commercial map, with a main road of packed earth and perhaps 30 structures on either side, a small shrine at the eastern end, and a sake house at the western end. And between them, the ordinary commerce of a mountain town in late winter. He brought her to the physician first, a man named Toda who approached illness the way a carpenter approaches a structural problem, with assessment and tools rather than alarm. He examined her arm with professional detachment and spoke to her directly, not simplifying or performing reassurance, but describing what was there and what was needed. She listened and nodded, and made a small gesture partway through that indicated where the pressure was most useful. Toda adjusted without comment, and something in his expression registered the mild professional interest of a man who has just learned something from a patient. Kale sat on a bench outside and waited. He was very tired. He had not been aware of being tired for 3 days. Purpose overriding the awareness, but sitting still on a bench in the weak afternoon sun, the tiredness arrived and he let it. She came out with her arm bound clean in fresh cloth, her coat sleeve pulled over it. She sat on the bench beside him, not the bench across the entrance, the same bench, leaving the space they had established over 3 days of road. He said, "There's an inn. The rooms are clean." She made the yes gesture. Then she looked at the sake house across the road and at him and made a small questioning motion, eyebrows, a slight inclination of her head. He understood this one clearly. "Yes," he said. They sat at a low table in the corner of the sake house, while the afternoon declined outside the paper screen windows. The light came through the screens as a soft gray-white that had warmth without intensity. The owner, a wide, efficient woman who placed cups and a flask without being asked, apparently finding nothing unusual about 2 travel-worn strangers sitting in silence, left them alone. She poured for him first, her left hand on the flask. The gesture easy and unhurried, the habit of someone for whom this particular courtesy had become structural rather than performed. He drank. She poured for herself. They sat with the cups and the fading light, and the sound of the kitchen moving in its efficient rhythm behind them. After a time, she reached into her coat and removed the folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully and placed it on the table between them with the deliberateness of someone making a decision they have made and unmade several times and have now finally committed to. It was a letter, dense characters in a practiced hand. The brushwork of someone who had been properly taught, the ink brown-black with age. She looked at him to confirm he was to read it. He read. It was from her husband, not the letter of a man writing to a wife, but of a man writing to a person he respected, informing her of conditions she needed to know for her own protection. It named his brother, and what the brother had done with their accounts, and what the brother had threatened regarding the documents she carried. It named a man she had understood to be an ally and described what that man had become. It told her to go south, to a specific name in a specific village, and to show that person this letter and no other. Her husband had written it 6 days before his death, 3 days before the bruising was applied to her arm by people who understood where pressure caused lasting damage. Cale refolded the letter along its original creases and placed it on the table. He looked at the paper screen windows and the gray light coming through them. She was watching him with the attention of a person waiting to see how information lands in another person, what it makes. He said, "The name in the letter, how far from here?" She held up one hand, 5 fingers. 5 hours. Less in these conditions. She made the yes gesture. He said, "Tomorrow." She held his gaze a moment. Then she reached forward and refilled his cup, and the gesture had the quality of something concluded, not emotionally, not as declaration, but in the way of an account properly settled, of 2 people who have been traveling in the same direction and have now confirmed it without ceremony. He lay awake that night in the inn while the mountain dark settled around the building. No wind. No snow. The occasional creak of the structure adjusting itself in the cold. From the adjacent room he could hear nothing. He lay awake because he was a man who lay awake in inns, cataloging exits, processing the day's logistics. The habit of years in conditions where the consequences of inattention were serious. But the particular quality of this wakefulness was different. It kept returning to specific small images, her hands sorting herbs in the waystation firelight, her footfall choosing its own independent line through the avalanche debris, the angle of her neck at the physician's table, indicating precisely where the pressure was useful, the letter on the safe house table, its creases refolded along the original lines. He was a man who had managed the inventory of what he kept and what he released, and the management had become automatic over many years: notice, assess, file, or let go. The things filed were tools. The things released were everything else. He understood now in the particular honesty of lying awake in mountain dark, filing her in the wrong category from the beginning. He was not a young man. He had lived in the conviction that solitude was not a deprivation but a consequence, and that consequences, if accepted with clarity, lost their capacity to cause suffering. He had been, on the whole, correct about this. The solitude had become architecture rather than wound. He had built within it. He had managed. What he was managing now was the awareness that architecture, if not maintained, could be entered. He had not given anyone permission. He was not certain. In the mountain dark, that permission remained the relevant category. They left Tanimoto at first light, south on the valley road toward a name in a letter. The valley road was better maintained than the mountain track, packed earth. Recent cart traffic, the evidence of people moving things between places with regularity. 4.5 hours with good conditions, and the particular efficiency of 2 people who had learned each other's pace well enough to stop negotiating it. The name in the letter was a woman, a former colleague of her husband's, a merchant's widow herself, occupying a large house at the northern edge of the village with the permanence of a person who has decided that impermanence is no longer a condition she is willing to accept. Her name was Autumn. She was 60 and had the manner of a person who had spent 4 decades in commerce and arrived at a philosophy of directness that left no room for performance in either direction. She received them at the door, read the letter twice, looked at Kale with the specific assessment of a woman who has seen many kinds of men, and said two things in quick succession, one to Seo that made something around Seo's eyes and jaw soften fractionally, the load partly transferred to another set of hands, and one to Kale. "You'll stay the night. Eat something real." It was not an invitation. He stayed. The house had a rear garden, snow-covered, bounded by a wooden fence and a stand of bare persimmon trees whose branches held the last fruit from the autumn harvest. Dark orange against the white and gray of the February afternoon, the particular excess of a tree that produces more than the winter can consume. He stood in the garden after the evening meal and looked at the persimmon trees. Somewhere in the valley, a bell struck the hour. The light was going in the slow way of late winter afternoons when the day has done its work and is simply completing its obligation. She came out after a time and stood near him, leaving the space they had established on the road. She was looking at the trees. The last light caught the side of her face, and the bound arm held slightly away from her body, and the places where 5 days of mountain road had pressed themselves into her coat and into the line of her shoulders. She reached into her coat pocket and removed a small piece of paper, not the letter, something new. Something written at the table inside while he and Autumn had talked about road conditions and the state of the southern passes. She held it out to him. He took it. "Read it," it said. "I have not spoken since the inn at Harutani. I chose this. I am telling you because you have not asked." He stood with the paper in his hand in the persimmon light of the late February afternoon, and understood several things in rapid succession that he had been understanding slowly across 5 days, which had now arrived at their destination. She had not been unable to speak. She had been unwilling, and the distance between those two things, between damage and decision, was the full measure of who she was. And he had traveled 300 kilometers in the specific company of that distance without knowing it, and now he knew it, and it changed nothing about what had occurred between them, and changed everything about what it meant. He refolded the paper. He held it a moment. Then he placed it carefully in the inner pocket of his own coat, over the place where he kept the things he did not intend to release. He looked at her. She was looking at the persimmon trees. "I know," he said. She turned her head slightly toward him. The expression on her face, the wall still present but something behind it now visible, the way fire is visible through the screen of a lantern. The light coming through rather than being blocked was not asking him anything. It was not requiring anything. It was simply present, the way the persimmon trees were present, the way the cold was present, the way the last orange light was present before it went. He would be on the road north tomorrow. She would remain here in the safety that her husband's careful planning had arranged. These were the facts of the situation. And the facts did not require his opinion to remain true. The last light went from the persimmon trees. The fruit returned to their dark selves in the dusk, the garden becoming shadow and snow, somewhere a horse, somewhere a temple bell, the particular creak of a building returning warmth to the cold, which is the sound a structure makes when something it has been holding has finally been allowed to rest. He looked at the bare branches of the persimmon trees against the darkening sky, at the last fruit clinging there, dark and soft and past the point of being saved, but still present, still holding, still orange at the center where the cold had not yet reached, and he thought of the road north, which would be what it had always been, and of the road he had just walked, which had become something it had not been when he started it, and of the specific weight now in his inner pocket, which was only paper but which he would carry the way he carried the things he did not intend to release, which was to say without thinking about it, which was to say always. The valley dark came down complete. Inside the house, Atom's lamp came on behind a paper screen, a warm rectangle of gold in the gray evening, and the smell of cedar smoke from the kitchen chimney came across the garden in the still air. And the cold pressed down from the mountains, with the patient conviction of something that has been here long before and will remain long after. Indifferent to whatever small warmth two people may have managed to carry between them across 300 kilometers of winter road, he stood in the garden until the last light was gone. Then he went inside. If you had been carrying a dead man's letter through 5 days of mountain winter, and someone walked beside you without asking why, would you have shown them the letter at the end, or kept it as the one thing that was still only yours?